Welcome to Ministry in Motion, where we explore best practices for your ministry in the 21st century. Whether you're a pastor or a volunteer minister in your local church, Ministry in Motion offers you resources, cutting-edge ideas, practical training and inspiration for your ministry. Our topic today is transforming your congregation into a praying community. And our guest, Jarod Thomas. Jarod, thanks so much for joining us on Ministry in Motion.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Anthony. Glad to be here.
Now, Jarod, you went through an experience with a congregation you were pastoring. You know, we learn best from stories. So tell us the story of what happened with your congregation and the impact of prayer upon that congregation.
Sure. I was pastoring in West Michigan, and actually it was at a pastor's gathering, getting together and with the brethren and talking about challenges and growing. And a friend of mine stood up and shared a testimony of some challenges he was having in his local church and how he began to gather the elders together to pray at some ridiculous hour in the morning, and the power that they began to see of God's hand moving in that congregation. And I said, this is the answer for some of the challenges that we were confronted with. The church had begun to outgrow its local facility.
That's a nice problem to have.
That's a blessing, right?
Yeah.
I mean, when you go down in the basement, you think our children's facilities are inadequate for the number of kids that we have. Mm-hmm. So there really were some neat things happening. The fact that our church was right next to the local fire station, which would interrupt my sermon almost predictably, right? But also not having any on-street parking. It was a great location for the church, right on Main Street in this little tourist town, Grand Haven, Michigan, mm-hmm. right on the lake shore there. But not having a parking lot, trying to service your elderly and providing valet parking, but at the same time, church members walking in from several blocks in the middle of wintertime when there's snow. We began to pray about some solutions. The Lord answered our prayers, and he got us a church. Actually, the issue preceded my time there. When the congregation first began looking for property, they found this church. It was listed at $785,000.
That's a lot of money.
That's a lot of money for a church of 150 members to raise. We began to pray and saw the price start to come down. It was a foreclosed church. It was at that point listed, I think, at $485,000. We made a lower offer. They rejected it. They came back a month later and said, why don't you resubmit your offer for $185,000?
Wow.
We resubmitted it. We got the church at a $600,000 discount. So crazy story, but all this process bathed in prayer, the board meetings. But the real challenge came when we couldn't sell that church. The
one on Main Street.
The one on Main Street. We couldn't sell it. So as I'm listening to my friend and I'm thinking, here we're going into the wintertime. We're paying utilities on two churches, a very large church with a nice facility, but sat empty for a while. Mm-hmm. And now we have to bring this new facility up to speed. Yeah. The old one we need to try to sell, but in the meantime, we're stuck in Michigan in the bitter cold, paying the heat in both of these buildings. So there's some significant challenges there. And I said, we need to pray more. We need to pray more and ask God to intervene. If he's leading us, it's not our problem, it's his, and we need to come together and acknowledge that.
So tell us about the prayer experience. When you say pray more, what happened? How did you pray? When did you do it? What did you do?
So I sent a personal letter out to my congregation, and I outlined the challenges, practical and financial, and I said, we need to get serious about this. Mm-hmm. So we began an early morning prayer service. Sometimes it's hard, you've got church programs, you've got the young people's meetings, you've got your regular prayer meeting, you have other things happening throughout the weeks, maybe small group ministry. Where can we squeeze in some extra prayer time?
People are busy. Yeah. So
people are busy.
And how early is early?
Well, early is pretty early. We started meeting at 5:30 in the morning. at the Seventh-day Adventist Community Center, which is just across town from our church. So we met there and began praying. People would pop in on their way to work and pray or leave. And frankly, it started out as a larger group. It began to significantly dwindle over time as sometimes people lose interest, but we had our core group of people that would come together and pray, starting at 5:30, sharing some requests, and then entering into specific prayer. Not long-winded prayers, not me praying for 20 minutes and then some poor saint falls asleep and then they pray and your mind starts to wander, but very short, specific prayers, and following a model of prayer where we're in the beginning praising God and thanking Him, and then entering in and confessing, saying, God, we haven't always believed in your power, corporate confession, and then pressing God for specific requests for the building, but also individuals we were studying with and other things that were happening in the community. And it wound up resulting in a pretty incredible experience.
Tell us, what happened? What came from this prayer time?
Well, the first thing that we began to see is personal revival among the members in gathering together. You know, it's amazing when you think, especially as a pastor, about your local congregation.
Yeah.
Who's going to be involved in this and who's not going to be involved in it? We began to see members coming out and engaging in regular prayer who we didn't see in the prayer meeting, who weren't necessarily involved in the active evangelistic outreach in the church, but they would come at 5:30 in the morning and bow their heads together as a congregation with us and enter into that experience of laboring and wrestling with God to move in our congregation. So first and foremost, I think that was one of the most interesting things for me as a pastor, to see people engaging in prayer who normally you wouldn't see in prayer.
So this is sacrificial time, in a sense. And people that are busy, they don't have too much discretionary time, sacrifice and investing that time in prayer. And things began to happen.
Yes.
Yeah. This is a wonderful story. I'd like to learn more, particularly about how the congregation was transformed by this community of prayer. Stay right there, Jarod, and you stay right there too. We'll be right back with more Ministry in Motion. Welcome back to Ministry in Motion. Our topic today is transforming your congregation into a praying community, and our guest is Jarod Thomas. Now, Jarod, you were telling us the story about Grand Haven in Michigan, and wonderful things have happened. Keep telling this story.
Sure.
And the results from it. We have the community of the church praying together at 5:30 in the morning. Tell us more about that.
So as we began to pray, we not only saw individuals coming out and engaging in, the spiritual discipline of prayer at this crazy hour of the morning, but we began to see God's hand move. We had an offer on the church. Someone came forward, offered us full price.
Wow.
And shortly thereafter, I was actually sitting in the local planning committee of the city council. And the offer fell through. Everything fell apart. So as we began to continue to pray and say, God, we know you have a plan. This is your problem. These are your finances. The church contributes in tithes and offerings. We just want to do your will. Please make it clear to us. And not long after that, we received another offer, not quite as high, but the offer that we received was the exact same price as the money that we paid for the former church. So when they come forward, we purchased a facility much larger, much more spacious, full parking lot, for almost 100 vehicles. Great location. $785,000 building priced a few years before for $185,000. This individual comes and offers us the exact same amount of money to sell our little postage stamp property on the main street right up the hill.
So it's a wash. It's just a straight transaction.
It was a wash,
Yeah.
yeah. So we gathered our board together, actually church business meeting, and we presented these things. And once again, we gathered together corporately in business, and we knelt and we prayed. We broke up into groups, and I offered a closing prayer, and we voted to accept the offer. And shortly thereafter, we sold that building. Not long after that, the mortgage on the new building was completely neutralized, actually, and the Lord worked everything out for us.
It's wonderful, isn't it? Yeah. So, Grand Haven, Michigan, just a complete congregation transformed with this sacrificial time of prayer and dedicatory prayer as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, is there a Bible reference, Jarod, that comes to mind that helped you through this whole process?
Yeah, as we look at the ministry of Jesus and we think about his ritual of prayer, we see Jesus doing some pretty radical things. As ministers, we plan a lot, we pray a lot on our own. You know, we're planning sermon series. If we're about our Father's business, we're thinking forecasting in the future, sermon series that we're going to do that are going to connect with the congregation at specific times. We're planning evangelistic outreach, hopefully mobilizing our congregation, board meetings, planning various events, but we don't often build prayer into the life cycle, whether it's daily, weekly, monthly, into the congregation. So when we see Jesus in Luke chapter 6, verse 12.
Okay. We've got that on the screen for our viewers. Okay, so Luke chapter 6.
Luke chapter 6, verses 12 through 13, the Bible says, actually referring to Jesus, in these days he, speaking of the Lord, went out to the mountain to pray, and all night he continued in prayer with God, or to God rather. And when the day came, he called his disciples and chose from them 12, whom he named apostles. Now, this isn't like picking a schoolyard baseball team.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
And if we think about the disciples whom Jesus chose, they weren't always on the same page. They came from various different socioeconomic backgrounds, different political ideas, and so forth. There was a lot of diversity. This is not the dream team, or you just kind of sit and pick and choose and think these are the individuals with the qualities. But the outcome of this was Jesus spending all night in prayer, communing with his Father, gathering the wisdom that he needed, because after all, in the book of John, Jesus says very consistently, I don't have the power to do the things that I'm doing. It doesn't come from me. I don't have the wisdom. The things that you're hearing me say, they're coming from God. So in the language of Philippians chapter 2, Jesus emptying himself and relying on the Father and his divine power. And that's really the experience that we wanted to cultivate in the local congregation. We're coming together, we're acknowledging we don't have the resources, we don't have the power, we don't have the wisdom. None of us had ever been through this process of selling a church and buying a church and lacking the resources. But God taught us through the process, and most importantly, he taught us to rely on him through the process. And as we set aside our own agendas, the local church politics of people who wanted it, people who didn't want it, we came together in prayer, in the example of Jesus, and then building that in and saying, if we're constantly lacking wisdom, we want to constantly be drawing upon God's wisdom. And that means when the program ends and we get into the church and everything is rosy now, are we going to continue to pray? And if we do, what are we going to see as we continue to press God's throne?
Exactly. I think you've raised a really important point about the model of Jesus, because earlier in Luke chapter 4, we have the account of him while he was in Capernaum, retreating early in the morning again
right.
and investing time in prayer, and the people actually going out and seeking Him and finding healing from Him as well. So it's a vital point, the importance of prayer. And let's face it, Jesus did establish a prayer community with His apostles as well, called through prayer, and then prayer was certainly a very high emphasis for them as well.
That's right.
Yeah. Jarod, there's more to this story I'd like to explore, particularly with this transforming a congregation into a praying community, much the same way that Jesus did. So stay right there, and we'll be right back with more Ministry in Motion. Welcome back to Ministry in Motion. Our topic today is transforming your congregation into a praying community, and our guest is Jarod Thomas. Now, Jarod, there's some challenges and even some hurdles that we need to encounter and that we do face in this transforming ministry, moving a church into an intentional prayer time. What's some of the ones that you encountered in your experience?
I think that one of the most important things is making sure that the congregation understands that when you're calling them together to pray, number one, that you're modeling prayer in your personal life, but also there are so many prayer programs in the local churches. I think of a traditional midweek meeting, or many churches call it a prayer meeting, and I found that in that midweek meeting, even though it may be called prayer meeting, there can be very little actual prayer that takes place in that meeting. So
tell us what can take place rather than prayer.
Well, I think as a pastor and always, teaching and studying and kind of being the center of the worship service.
Okay, pastor-centric, yes.
We're accustomed to that, and I think when we see another church program, we see the opportunity, whether it's intentional or maybe not so much, we just gravitate towards the front. We began doing a series of not necessarily devotionals that prepare us for prayer, but that Bible study time and that teaching time can take up the bulk of it, where prayer becomes maybe a little appetizer at the beginning or a little thing that we do at the end.
Yeah.
So really understanding the needs of the congregation and making the prayer time a time when congregants can come together and express their concerns and express their praises. And actually, I think that's
in prayer,
in community and the social, but then moving very quickly into prayer.
Okay.
Another challenge is allowing that prayer time to be consumed with prayer requests. And I don't know about you, but I've been in either a worship setting, whether it's a divine service or an additional service, where we share prayer requests, and this person fell and broke their hip, this dear old saint, and another person
tragic.
died, and this thing, and before we're approaching God's throne, yes, there are real burdens that we all face and real challenges, but not allowing all of these bad things and presenting God then with a laundry list of things, but engaging in dynamic prayer where we're praising God and engaging Him. If coming to prayer meeting is just talking about all the bad things that happened that week, you can turn on the nightly news and get the same kind of negative report. But this is an empowering call to prayer. So I think changing that culture and that precedent for prayer. Another thing that's important is trying to squeeze in times. We squeezed in an early morning time at 5:30 in the morning. It worked for some people. And I was surprised the people that it worked for. It didn't work for everyone. So then thinking, okay, if we try to utilize the prayer meeting in the midweek, or if we try to utilize some of that buffer time between the divine service, if you have multiple services, to mobilize prayer between. We prayed for the service before the service, and then praying for the service after the service. If, as a pastor, you make an evangelistic appeal, gather or have a prayer leader gather individuals at the front of the congregation and pray specifically for decisions that were made in your congregation that morning.
Right. Now, Jarod, did you ever do an all-night prayer service?
You know, we never did, but I have friends that did. That was one step that we didn't make that step. But having an all-night prayer service, prayer and singing and those types of things, sharing scriptures, claiming the promises of God, it takes some planning. But if done well, it can be very powerful. And I know that if we do those types of things, we're going to see God move in our local congregations.
Right. Now, tell me about your ministry in this local church. For instance, how did this transformative and transforming prayer time, how did that impact your ministry? And particularly with perhaps even baptism, should we go there?
Sure. Well, it helped me, and I think that this is the beautiful thing of prayer, is that it really cuts to the heart of our own self-sufficiency, because we're acknowledging that as a pastor, I don't have all the answers. I don't have the power. There was an individual I was doing Bible studies with for 2 years, and there were some real roadblocks that we had. And you know, as I pull out my Bible, I have all the answers.
Yeah.
I've studied, I've prepared, but the answers just weren't cutting it, Anthony.
To meet these objections?
To meet these objections and really to convince a person on a heart level. And sometimes we can deal with the convictions or the objections, but we're not getting to the root core heart of the issue. So we began to pray and really continuing and incorporating our Bible study interests in prayer. And actually it was on a Monday morning before the divine service, gathered with my congregation, and we were praying for our interests in the community. As we prayed and as we got up from prayer, and again, it's not everyone in the church, it's just a handful of dedicated people, and that's all it takes. You don't need to convert everyone and get everyone there, but you have your individuals that are, you know, holding up the hands of Moses, so to speak. We were gathering there praying, and as I got up from my knees and as I left to walk over to the parsonage, I got a text message on my phone. I pulled it out, and it said, "Pastor, in my study time this morning, God spoke to me about some of the things that you've been telling me about, and I'm really convicted, and I see this, and I want to order my life, you know, according to this issue she was having, and seeing it in Scripture, but wrestling." She says, "I want to be baptized."
Wow.
And I said to my friend Joyce, when did this happen? She said, "Just a few minutes ago when I was studying my Bible." It was the exact same time that we were praying together for her.
Extraordinary. Jarod, I want to thank you. Thank you so much for coming on to Ministry in Motion and sharing your experience, transforming prayer, how it completely changes a congregation. And thank you for joining us for another program of Ministry in Motion. I'd like to invite you to come to our website. On our website, you can view all of the programs that we've made on Ministry in Motion. Helpful, informative, instructive programs that will be a blessing to your ministry. You can view them on demand, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Our prayer at Ministry in Motion is for all those doing ministry in their local church, that God will continually bless them, and may He bless you.